fundamental technological or economic change, right? That's like really going to matter. Like, the sort of classic kind of 10x, right? Something being done 10x better, something being done 10x cheaper, something being 10x more available than it used to be. So we're looking for really substantive underlying technological change. We're looking for a team of people who have a long-term commitment to building a business. Taking that technological change and then using it to build a great product and using it to build a great business. Our assumption when we invest, our assumption every time is that we're going to be involved for 10 years or more, right? And if you look at the data for venture capital, for what we do, generally the time from investment to exit, kind of ranges over time. It kind of ranges from 7 years on the fast side to 11 years on the slow side. And then for the great companies or the great, projects, efforts, networks that get built, that 11 years might be 15 or 20 or 30 years, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you were one of the original investors in, the great tech companies of today, 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, you probably would wish that you had, stayed in them the whole time and actually never sold the stock. And so we always kind of take that approach. I differentiate that from two other kinds of approaches. The sort of polar opposite is just trading. And of course, I have a lot of respect for traders and they have a specialized skill set for what they do, but it's just not what we do. And then there's this kind of intermediate class of investors that are kind of venture-ish crypto funds, but are set up as hedge funds. And they run, and the reason that happened is because, the crypto assets are liquid, right? Often right out of the gate. Whereas, with classic venture investments, when we invest in a Series A, kind of classic venture company, the stock's, not liquid, right? For the first several years. So I think that my point is, I think the fact that with new crypto projects, the crypto was liquid in the beginning has caused a lot of crypto funds to be set up as hedge funds, meaning they're on like a 1-year investment cycle and they're on a 1-year compensation cycle, and they kind of end up being active traders, even if that's not really what they were set up to do. And that approach may make sense, and maybe they're more nimble than we are, and so forth. And so maybe there's an advantage to that. But our approach is just go hard the other way. We assume we're locked up for a long time. We basically don't trade. We very rarely make a trading decision. It's almost always something that we've held for many years. And so anyway, I go through that long version of that just to kind of say we're not trying to play any kind of short or even medium term price thing. We don't even really have a view on prices, to be totally honest. And so I certainly would not make a prediction on that.
To add on to what you just said, by the way, Mark, if you can get closer to the mic, if it's possible, just to get your volume a bit louder, it would be great. But for anyone not in crypto, the point that Mark made is really important, and we discussed this at length. Crypto VC funds kind of became like hedge funds because they get immediate liquidity. So when you invest in a project as a VC, your equity is locked up for 5, 10, 15 years. But in this case, you get the tokens within weeks or months. And what happened is when we were in a bull market, all the tokens were heavily inflated and all the VCs were immediately selling the tokens, getting an immediate, kind of getting all their money back in some cases. So that's what made the last bull market pretty unsustainable. And that's why we saw a lot of projects crash since, because a lot of VCs just dumped their tokens because they got early liquidity. So I'm glad you made this point. And I know that Andreessen, you guys are, you guys have a pretty long-term view on every investment. Before moving so my next topic, I want to ask you a few questions about the concept of free speech and obviously Elon, the Twitter files. But before doing so, I've got one more question about crypto and the metaverse. Yep. Facebook's rebrand to Meta, obviously it was initially, everyone praised that decision, and then the sentiment changed over the last few months. What are your thoughts on Facebook? I think you guys invested in Instagram. Correct me if I'm wrong, not sure if you invested in Facebook, but would love your thoughts on where Facebook is heading with their recent rebrand.
Yeah, so I'm also on the Facebook board. So I'm on the Meta board. So, and as a board member, I shouldn't really be saying anything. So I'll just say what, I'll basically say, I think what Mark says, which is, it's actually very similar. Mark has the same mentality, that I just kind of relayed, I think, for his company, which is, it's a long-term mentality. And so he's making he's making a long-term bet and a long-term investment, in building, basically what he thinks is the computing platform of the future. He's, the company is pouring a lot of resources into it, throughout kind of the R&D stack and content and everything else. And so I don't know. I think it's the kind of thing, and here, I'm tooting my own horn here because I'm associated with the company, but like, I think it's the kind of thing that great companies should do, right? Like, it's like, what's the point of being a great, technology company at scale if you can't undertake the sort of large scale R&D efforts that kind of fundamentally bring new technologies into the world. And we look back over the course of the preceding century or whatever, and we idolize people like Henry Ford or Thomas Edison, or we idolize Howard Hughes, or kind of these great companies over 50 or 100 years that built all the modern technologies that we all take for granted today. And I think like as an American, like as a maybe like a world citizen, I feel like it's great that we have companies and founders and leaders that are willing to make these big bets. And so, and I certainly think he's top of the list on that.
Yeah, and I think that judging that decision so early on, when the metaverse is a concept that just started catching attention, in my opinion, is very unfair. The initial hype and then the FUD afterwards doesn't make sense. That's a 5, 10, 15-year vision, and one that is just too early to start seeing results today. But in terms of the metaverse moving forward, and that's my last question, focus on Web3 and crypto. The metaverse moving forward, how do you see that evolve, especially the concept of an open metaverse with digital ownership playing a key foundational role in that? How long do you think it will take for us to have that open metaverse, and how would that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I can't. It's hard to say. People have to build it. My ideas are always kind of My ideas kind of always go back to the original internet architecture, right? Like, I came of age, kind of came into the industry in the late '80s, early '90s, and some people in the space are probably old enough to remember kind of what the internet was like in those days.
I do.
Right, right.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Special place. Like, it was a
It
very
was.
special place. It was like a very special set of people. It was
Mhm.
this thing where it kind of attracted the smartest people in the world at the time. Was an incredible, we'll talk about free speech, but like, it was an incredible environment of free speech, free exchange of ideas, free expression. A lot of
Yep.
modern culture today came out of that, kind of came out of that area. It was invented, it was kind of invented. Like, if in 1992, if you went on what was at the time, social networking at the time was sort of in the form of this thing called Usenet.
Usenet.
Uh,
Yep.
right. And if you went to Usenet, it had it had all these different news groups, all these different forums that you could be a part of. And there was there was like comp and, for computer science, and there was sci for science, and all these different ones. And then there was alt, right?
Yep.
And then under alt was like every conceivable form of possible like interest and, human activity that you could possibly imagine. And people were debating every single aspect of human life and politics and society, and, creative expression and all
Even
kinds of
woke
things.
culture came from there, right? Woke culture, all the terms that people use now for, gender identity and stuff, that came from news groups.
Yeah, a lot of that was some of that was later, some of that was later, some of that was Tumblr, which
Yeah,
kind of was
Tumblr. Yeah, it's like well, how would you call it? Like a place for brewing these ideas, right? College
yeah,
kids, they go there, and then they put their gender studies stuff. They merge it with fandom, and now you have this marriage of ugly fandom with wokeness, and it's just it's awful.
yeah. But it started, regardless of how it ended up, it started as
Yep.
this very free form, kind of thing. And so, anyway, and the web, and then out, when we built the web in the modern form, like, we built it kind of in that image, right? And so the idea, of course, was anybody can create a web, browser, anybody can create a web server, anybody can create a website.
Yep.
There were all kinds of yep, exactly. There are all kinds of architectural decisions we made at the time. So I'll just give you an example. Like, we made the decision at the time, this predated me, but like the group of people that I kind of ended up falling into kind of made this decision that, for example, the protocol should be text-based, not binary. And it was at the time a very, kind of controversial thing, because it's like, internet was very slow and inefficient at the time, and bandwidth was at a premium. And so you've got these inefficient text-based protocols, and like, why are you making it so slow? And the answer was because it basically means anybody can create a web server by basically creating a program that emits text. And so you could create a web server with like, 4 lines of scripting code at the time. And that was, kind of how the web got bootstrapped.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it were totally up to me, like, the metaverse would work a lot like that. Like, it would work a lot like the web. It would work a lot like the open internet. It would be something
It would
where,
make a lot of sense. Yeah, it's
right.
decentralized in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Where millions of people could contribute, right? Millions of people
Yep.
could contribute. Millions of
Very
people could
open source.
write, create
Mm-hmm.
experiences. Yep, exactly.
And people
And
made
so,
tools for this, right? Like there were like at least a dozen different web browsing, sorry, not web editing tools. Microsoft had Encarta, and then later on had like Front Page. But then you also had like Dreamweaver and all these web-based tools that now are very simplified, and they use it on like Squarespace or something.
yeah, that's right. And you'll notice as we talk about this, right, the kind of the dream of crypto, right? The dream of crypto and blockchain is actually very similar to the internet dream, right? The idea of an open system, the idea of a decentralized system, the idea of a permissionless system, the idea of a system in which you can have 1 million people contributing without anybody in the middle being able to wag their finger and say no. And and look, that's what created the internet. Like that's how we got to where we are, and it like worked incredibly well, I think. And so I would hope that's kind of where the metaverse goes, but there's a lot of work, of a lot of smart people between now and then. So hopefully in the next, whatever, 5 or 10 years, over time we'll get there.
And before we pivot to free speech, do you think we may head to, where we're preaching decentralization now, could we head to more centralization similar to Web 1 started out decentralized and obviously it's a lot less decentralized today?
Yeah, so we talk about that a lot. So my partner Chris Dixon has talked about a lot about this. So I'll kind of borrow his kind of phrasing on this, which I agree with, which is, there's like these two models. It's like the tech industry kind of goes back and forth between kind of this horizontal model and vertical model. So like PCs were like horizontal. There were all these different companies that kind of made, different layers of the stack that made the PC. The iPhone is, vertical. It's a completely, it's a single company that kind of makes everything, including, increasingly its own silicon. So there's like this horizontal, vertical back and forth. And then there's this centralized, decentralized back and forth, which is kind of the sort of larger version of that. The full version of centralized is just a single integrated company, a sort of a classic walled garden. And then the full version of decentralized is a network, right? And so, and originally in the old days with the internet, it was a face off between, the internet and AOL, right? And
there was a closed system. Yeah,
exactly. And by the way, there was a while there where AOL was better in the sense of like AOL had more features. AOL was like, maybe, there were a bunch of advantages. There were a bunch of things. There was a lot of content that was on AOL that wasn't on the internet yet. And by the way, there was an economic model on AOL. People could get paid for content on AOL where they couldn't get paid for content on the internet. So there were advantages to the centralized approach. It's just the decentralized approach allowed for more creativity. And so it just turned out once the internet got going, you were just going to have the internet was going to end up with 1 million times more features than the centralized thing, just because you were going to unleash the whole world of creativity. And so basically, it's like companies versus networks. One of the ways that we pursue this, with our program now, basically, is like when we invest in a crypto company, that's structured as a C corporation, we'll invest with a term sheet that basically allows them to flip into being a network anytime they want. And so we basically invest kind of agnostic as to the outcome because we want to let the founders decide where that shakes out. But there's for obvious reasons there's a fairly large number of founders now that want to do that and want to flip, and even if they start as a company they want to take their system decentralized and build a network. And I would certainly hope that I would hope that there are many more networks in the next 20, 30 years that are of the scale of the internet, the web, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and so forth. Because
it's a bit like IBM, right? I'm sorry, it's a bit like IBM back in the 80s when they had the PC and that was a closed ecosystem, and then they just started licensing out the PC, x86 to just literally anybody, and that's why PCs got so much larger than the Macintosh, which was a closed system. And then there are like other rivals. I think Steve Jobs tried to create the what was the system that he made? It did like Next PC or something like that. Yeah. It's a closed ecosystem. It didn't really take off at all, but we saw who won. Decentralization won in the end because innovation happened, right? Different countries that are producing their stuff, like Taiwan, Korea, and that's the reason why they're powerhouses today, because of the decentralization.
Yeah, this is the thing, and there's again, let's get a little bit of the free speech topic, but there's always this, and you could also say this is even a more generalized kind of question of like the different economic models of like socialism versus capitalism, which is there's always this tendency, there's this thing of like, okay, if the system is really open, right? If the economy is really open, people can do what they want. If the web is really open, if crypto is really open, then bad things might happen, right? Like bad people might do bad things. People might create bad things. People might say the wrong thing. People might do something we disapprove of, right? And and by the way, some of those things are going to be actually bad, and society's going to have to figure out a way to deal with them. But the other side of that is if you start with a restricted system, a restricted top-down system where people have to get permission for everything new, then you just know for sure that most new things won't happen, right? I mean, number one is like
chilling speech. Has a chilling effect. Sorry.
So speech, but also, it's sort of, speaking, writing code, building new technologies, starting new businesses. Like, what those things all have in common is it's sort of individual human beings who are sort of the closest to the information, required to know whether something's a good idea or not, and then devoting a huge amount of effort to bringing something new into the world where they don't even know whether it's going to work, right? And so, at least historically, the systems that enable this sort of decentralized innovation, decentralized speech, decentralized, finance, historically they've outperformed. The U.S. outperformed the Soviet Union. Many examples like that through history. And so I think you get maximum creativity with an open system, with a decentralized system. And my hope over time, as I said, is that we'll see a lot more of those.
Yeah, I agree, and I think I've always said that decentralization is still an experiment in progress. Obviously, democracy could be one example of that, and I'll use that to kind of pivot to free speech. What's your general take on the recent movement behind free speech?
Yeah, we saw your tweets. Free speech.
Yeah, I was gonna, and I'll refer to a tweet now. So one specific tweet, and I highly recommend you guys check out Mark's tweets and try to make sense of them. But one particular tweet I'll bring up as well. Quote, baseless has become a code word for true, which I love. I'd love to know what you mean by that.
Yeah, so Peter has the hard form, I would say the strong form of this claim. Peter said in a talk a while back, he said, anything you're not allowed to say is by definition true. Right?
I love it.
Because
yeah.
because that's what they're afraid of, right? That
that threatens them.
Exactly. No, I will not go that far. I can think of some things that you're not allowed to say that are not actually true. So I will not go that far. But I will say, look, whenever anybody puts themselves in a position where they think they can decide what's true or not on behalf of everybody else, right? I just think like that's a hopeless, that's you're in the position of the, Pope judging Galileo, like you're just in this position where no human being is smart enough, or wise enough or moral enough, to be able to make those decisions. And so there's a lot of people running around now who have sort of appointed themselves hall monitors and have decided that they can call what other people say baseless or whatever. It's always jargon, right? It's always some sort of
the Disinformation Governance Board, and that's like literally or was a thing, and they're still trying to push it through NGOs.
Yeah, so the Aspen Institute recently, the most Orwellian thing I've seen recently is the Aspen Institute they have this new program on what they call information disorder.
Wow, that's a new one. I'm adding that to my list. Information disorder.
Information disorder, yes. And let me come out strongly on the side of information disorder, right? That's how, because information order, information order sounds like the most Orwellian thing you can possibly say, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, more on that, so because, terms like baseless and misinformation, they're all code words for anything that isn't favorable to the mainstream media or the, the far left narrative that's dominated mostly by woke people. How do we, as a broader society, combat all these efforts to disenfranchise, I would say, the vast majority of the human race? I mean, how do we fight that as a decentralized group of people?
I guess, it's obviously a very big question, very deep topic. All of these things are choices. I guess my big thing is all these things are choices. Like, who's in charge of the society is a choice. Who makes the rules is a choice. Who gets listened to is a choice. Who gets laughed at is a choice.
Yep.
And so, the foundation of all of it just kind of has to be like, we need to actually decide what we want. And if we want to live in a society in which there's a small number of people who get to tell everybody what to think, then we'll get that. And if we want to live in a society in which we have these are questions that have been litigated and fought over for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? To be able to be in a society where people can say what they want and not be shut down. And so we have to want it. We have to take action. We have to be willing to stand up. We have to be willing to support people who stand up. It's
basic
gonna be
cancel culture, right? I mean, we have to resist it actively. I mean, in my opinion, we have to resist it actively. We see a person getting canceled for, really dumb reasons, like that Google engineer, the one who got fired, right? Because he put out a paper that was, he said that there are differences between genders or whatever, and they asked him to make the paper. I forget the guy's name, but we have to stand up for these people.
I think.
James Damore. Thank you. Yeah, James Damore. And if we don't do it, then we're basically, our silence is compliance, right? That's the message that they say, and it's, in my opinion, 100% true.
But then it's getting harder and harder to stand up to free speech. now it's just so easy to censor people. Before social media, it was a lot harder. When you're on the street, when you're with your friends, the government can't be right next to you, or any central body be right next to you and say, hey, stop saying that. But now with social media, using algorithms, it's much easier to censor. And we've seen competitors come up competing with Twitter, and none of them, to my knowledge, gain traction.
And they
So
were deplatformed as well. Keep that in mind, right? I mean, Parler was removed as one of the first platforms to compete with Twitter properly. Was removed from the App Store and the Google Ads, the Play Store, and so they could not even like reasonably compete against Twitter at the time.
but then my question mark is where do you draw the line? Because some level of censorship, most of us agree, and that was a debate we had 2 days ago, is needed. But where can and as soon as a person draws the line, then that same person or that same group of people can then move the line. So how do you find that balance?
Yeah, so a couple things. So one is, I actually don't quite agree with what you said. I mean, I understand why you said it, and there's truth to it for sure, but I don't totally agree with the conclusion that things are worse now than they used to be before the internet on censorship. So before the internet, and I am old enough to remember this, like most contrary information just simply didn't exist, right? Like it
Yeah.
wasn't available, right? Like if you wanted to like discover a heterodox view to something that was like a prevailing belief in the society, like you literally was like, okay, I gotta go to the library, right? I
Mm-hmm.
gotta like go in the card catalog. I gotta try to find a book, and like hopefully the library has bought that book. And by the way, maybe they haven't, and if they haven't, like I'm SOL.
And they
And
would put your name
so,
on a list if you're, if they're in the FBI and you were looking up, bomb
oh yeah,
making
by the way,
manuals or something.
in the back of the book was a list of all the people who checked the book out.
Yep.
You could actually just read the names. It's like, yep, they're all the wrong thinkers, right?
Yep.
And so, look, the even after all the censorship of the last 15 years or whatever, like information is still so much more widely available online today than it used to be. Like just like to many many orders of magnitude. And therefore the freak out, right? I mean, that's why the sort of home monitors are as freaked out as they are. There's a degree to which like the campaign is not working.
Is that why they
Um,
took down Z Library? I'm not sure if you're familiar with Z Library. It used to be this online free library of all these pirated books, but people mostly went there because they wanted to download stuff that was just unavailable, to even order, right? Like that was the big impetus for taking them down, in my opinion.
When was the library taken down?
A few weeks ago, I want to say sometime in the last month or like the month before. It was run by a couple of Russian guys, and it was a free library. You could pirate any book you wanted.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the problem with books is, the obvious problem is copyright, right? So
Yeah.
Google, for those of you who followed this thing, like Google ran into the hard version of this problem as well when they did their Google Books program, right? And the sort of result of that is that Google Books, I think it's like 1923 is like the copyright cutoff for
Yeah.
public domain, and so Google Books has like every book published prior to 1923 that's in any of the major university libraries, but they don't. I don't think they really have any books after 1923, and
It's
it
all
just got.
nerfed. Yeah, they got
Well, it's like
excerpts.
you even have this thing where it's like there will be a book that was published that's under copyright, and then the publishing company went out of business, but like does somebody own does somebody whoever owned the data of the publishing company did not own the copyrights? Maybe they've sat dormant for 20 years, and they still, but you still can't get clean rights to do it. So there's issues with that. It's just this artifact of how books get published.
So,
I don't know about you guys. Like, I mean, look, I pay for a lot of content online. We're involved in Substack, and I pay for a lot of Substack, and I love
Yeah.
it. But like a lot of the sort of most interesting kind of heterodox alternative information on the internet is free, right? It was produced for free. It's distributed for free.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's out there, it like as long as that continues to be the case, like the censorship battles will get fought, and they're very important. But the internet itself is still very resilient to this kind of control, and I think in the long run, I think the censorship in the long run is a losing battle.
yeah, and I think we saw that with. I read somewhere that when the Biden laptop story was censored, people started searching for it 5 times more 2 days after it was censored. And then the Andrew Tate story as well. So when he was censored, he blew up even further. So what we're seeing now is when something gets censored on the main platforms, people are trying to find it elsewhere, and they try to search for that information. Having said that, what are your thoughts on the recent moves and Elon's way of running Twitter?
Yeah. So we're also involved in that. So we're invested with Elon in his takeover. I mean, we're thrilled. I mean, we're excited. We were excited to do it with him. We're excited by by what he's doing. I would just say two things. Like he's been very vocal, kind of on his views on this stuff. So I would just say two things, which is one is like all of my private conversations with him mirror exactly what he said in public, which is that he is very committed to free speech. He cares a lot about freedom of expression. He talks very kind of openly and emotionally about the future of civilization and the need for free expression. And it's the culture that he comes out of, and it's the culture that made everything else that he's done in his life possible. And so he takes it very seriously. And so I think he's a true believer. And then
That's good.
the other thing is like there's a business opportunity. Like there's just a flat out there's the great finance term arbitrage. If everybody's going left, then there may be money to be made in going right. Not ideologically, I mean, but just like as a if all of the other major companies are going to have big censorship campaigns going, then being the service that has more freedom of speech is going to be just a straight up commercial opportunity.
I think even Mark Zuckerberg has weighed in on this, right? When he was speaking at the New York Times book thing, he said that it's going to be like it's an interesting experiment to see where Elon goes with this, and that maybe Meta might even follow suit if it looks successful.
I would say, without commenting specifically on Facebook, I would say that I would say every tech CEO I talk to is watching Elon like a hawk.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
So, and if they're running, if they're running some sort of social platform or user-generated content platform, they're watching very carefully to see if they can, maybe learn from what he's doing. And then the other thing that's happening is they're all watching what he's doing in terms of the company culture and how he's running the company. And he took out 80% of the employees and contractors right up front. And he's running the company in a fundamentally leaner and much more engineering-centric way that has become, kind of the standard in the Valley. And so there's a lot of CEOs who are watching him very carefully, saying, if you can run like that, maybe we can, or some version of it.
Maybe fire all the diversity teams, because they don't contribute to any of the engineering.
Let's just say there are a lot. Let's just say, there are a lot. Let's just say, a lot of there are companies in the last 20 years that became very, let's just say, fully staffed in many areas. Some of which had a direct bearing on making products and selling them to customers, and maybe there were many other kind of goals that companies ended up strapping on that maybe they now wonder about. And so it's a chance to kind of re-ask some pretty fundamental questions, which I think a lot of CEOs would like to re-ask.
I would hope so, because I mean, given how I hate calling them the woke, but that's what we're referring to them as. I mean, these guys instituted their policies through the what was it called? It's like not terms of service, but it was like some sort of broad document where it says you basically have to be woke if you're running a Silicon Valley company, and they got all these different companies to sign on. It started at, I think, at GitHub, right? One of the engineers there, she made this thing. It's like oh god, I can't remember the exact name of it. Name's not coming to me, but you know what I'm talking about, right? Like all these companies signed on to it, GitHub signed on to it, and then there's like a whole list of like all these organizations that, for all intents and purposes, are just producing, code, or they're producing products, and now they're all like signed on to these diversity ideas, and it's actually driving them down. I think one of the few companies that didn't sign on to it is Slack, right? They actually some internal employees tried to enforce it in there, and they were like, the CEO was like, no, you're not going to change the company culture to suit your vision of whatever, and they fired all those guys, which is pretty interesting.
So Mark, I'll give Brian the mic for a quick question, then Alex, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I know you're close to Elon. I was just curious, do you see it as a positive or a negative that he kind of tweets everything that's on his mind, even like the controversial stuff, like the Fauci, prosecute Fauci stuff? Do you think that's a smart business move? Do you think that maybe he could tone things down? Where do you fall on that issue?
My whole life, I've been listening to people kind of say, wow, the thing about public figures is they're so dishonest, right? They don't say what they think. They're always, corporate executives are always standing up in front of crowds, and they're always using this kind of corporate speak. And people have all these hidden agendas, and there's all these secrets, there's things we're not allowed to find out. And, nobody's like telling us what they're actually doing. And so I guess I would say, like, to the extent that has been like generally true for a long time, like Elon is definitely 100% the opposite of that. And so, without, trying to, whatever, get into any specific thing. I mean, he tells you exactly what he's thinking, right? Like he tells you exactly what he's thinking. Like, exactly what he's thinking. And it's people, if you talk to people who work for him, they'll tell you the same thing. Like they wake up in the morning, they check his tweets. They're like, wow, that's what he's thinking today. Right. Like, and if they talk to him, right? And if they talk to him, they catch him in the halls, he's going to say the exact same thing, right? It is literally what he's thinking. And so I think it's, I don't know, like, I think it's I think it's stripped away, it's a stripping away of what I maybe had become like an overly, synthetic, stylistic, kind of obscurantist kind of way of having, there was this book written like 50 years ago called The Image. And it's this book about sort of political culture, but you apply it more broadly, like corporate culture also. And so in the Image, he talks about this concept he calls pseudo events. And he says pseudo events are basically, it's like, a press conference is a pseudo event, right? Or like a photo op is a pseudo event. Yeah. Right. A pseudo event is something where everybody shows up, like, the corporate executive or the politician or whatever, they show up to do the thing. All the reporters show up to cover the thing. They write the story about the thing. Everybody acts like it's a real thing, but everybody's fully aware that it's totally fake, right? Like, it doesn't mean anything. It's just like, it's just something that's a deliberately manufactured illusion. And then, the actual like real decisions and real conversations are happening behind the scenes, and, people in secret conference rooms and smoke-filled rooms, where normal people never have insight into it. Yep. And I think we got used, under mass media, right? Under, 3 television networks and, 1 newspaper per city and so forth. We got used to living in a world in which we just assumed we were living in a world of pseudo events. And then people got cynical, right? Like a lot of, when I was a kid, like it was,
it's a simulation.
Yeah, it's like it's a simulation, but it's like a simulation. Everybody knows it's a simulation. Like nobody's
right,
actually...
it's a simulation and simulacra. I think Baudrillard talked about that in his book of that same title, right? And it's we know everything is fake, but we just go along with it anyway, knowing it's fake.
Yeah, exactly, and then it breeds cynicism, right? It causes people to get cynical. It makes another guy to read on this. David Foster Wallace wrote this thing about kind of television culture, and he talked about irony. He wrote this manifesto. It was like 25 years ago. But he wrote this manifesto. It was like against irony was kind of the theme of it. And it's like, irony is poison. Like irony is what happens. Irony is the attitude that you adopt when you can't trust the people who are in charge and talking to you, and there's my business partner Ben has somebody who's very close to a relative who worked as a lineman for the phone company for many years, climbing up the telephone poles, to fix the lines, which is a very important and also quite dangerous job. And he once asked his relative, he said, did you ever interact with any of the executives at the company? And he said, oh yeah, they come by once a year and blow smoke up my ass. Right. Like you just assumed, you're working for these companies, you just assume you're being lied to all the time. You're a customer of these companies, you just assume you're being lied to all the time. Yep. You're listening to a politician on TV, you just assume you're being lied to. And if there's sufficient media control, right? Like if all the media is top down and centralized, then they can get away with it, right? And there's sort of this compact that develops between, the people doing the talking and the people covering it, where they're just going to, all they're going to do is write about pseudo events. And so, I don't know. I think like I wanted to go through that because it's like, okay, why is somebody like Elon, like why does what he's doing even come across as surprising, right? Because in a sense, right, the least surprising thing in the world would be somebody who just like stands up and tells the truth. Like you might even say that's like the least surprising thing somebody could do. It's like just like the obvious default thing to do. And yet it is so surprising because we're just not used to it. Right. And I think it's a model of leadership that I think is going to be, I think more and more people are going to figure out like this is actually the right way to do things.
It's like when he joins a space and he doesn't have like a PR team, coaching him. Like, when we did a space with Hunter Biden, he had like a PR guy standing behind him and they would literally, vet the questions and censor people. And if they didn't like a question, they leave, right? And that's exactly what happened. He left.
Yeah, like and again, there are people who know him a lot better than I do. I will just say, like, he's never told me one thing in public that doesn't match what he said, or he's never told me one thing in private that doesn't match what he says in public. Mm-hmm. And so
that answers my question. Like, I was wondering whether his tweets are strategic or just honest, and they just seem to be his honest thoughts, no filter.
There was this. He goes through. He's been through various legal proceedings over the years, and there was this one leaked email from one of his boards where I don't know, they were yelling at him about his tweets or something, and he finally just says in the email chain, he's like, you know what, like I'm just going to tweet what I think and let the chips fall where they may.
That's pretty based.
And it's like shit. Like why not, right? Like why Now people may have issues with the substance and but like the idea that he's some I don't know. Yeah, maybe I don't want to push it too far, but I'd say like, yeah, like telling the truth in public should be the least radical thing anybody does, right? Not the most
Everybody
radical
does.
thing.
It should be normal.
Yeah, like
right?
I think yeah, exactly. And back to your point before I go to Alex, back to your point is we were complaining when people were too secretive and not being, Mark Zuckerberg's kind of the opposite of Elon in my view. And a lot of people complain how he's not out there more, he's not sharing his thoughts, he's not being more transparent. And then you have Elon being too transparent, and then people complain like, hey, these things should be kept private, you shouldn't be tweeting them. But on the other side of the other side of the argument, like every tweet of Elon's has impact. When he came on our space the first time, and the first thing he said was Doge to the moon, and then while we were on the space, we just saw Doge pump. Like these things are just not normal. We've never, like, the complete opposite of when I had Hunter Biden on the show. It's like I had a set rules I had to follow, and when I broke the rules, everything went to shit, and I was on the front page of Fox News after the show went to shit. It's just like, it's such a dichotomy. I'll go to ALX.
Before we do, I just want to.
Yeah,
I remember the thing I was referring to. Like in 2014, there's this thing called a contributor covenant, and it's.
Can you hear me? My audio.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Can Alex hear me?
No, I don't think you can. I'll fix it up. Go ahead. Ian.
Okay, yeah. So I was saying, like, the thing I was referring to about the code of conduct, that's the contributor covenant, and they kind of strong arm like a whole bunch of open source projects to accept it, and it's basically coding wokeness into these projects, and it's quite insane. It's quite insidious, right? I mean, so my question about that is, how do we fight against all these extremely woke efforts to control the narrative or control the culture even?
I mean, I don't, yeah, lots of people have talked about that. I don't know that I really have anything to add, other than just, like I said, these things are all choices, right? And so I think, employees have to decide, which companies they go to, which policies they want to support. I think we all have to make those decisions. Like these have to be collective actions. Collective actions are made up of individual decisions. People have to decide what kind of world they want to live in, and they have to, take actions to support that.
I've got one more question before ALX. What do you consider to be worse? Mainstream media bias, and obviously it's not all media is equal, but mainstream media bias or social media echo chambers?
Yeah, the echo chamber thing is really interesting because again, you kind of want to make the assumption, and like there's some truth to it. It's like, okay, like it's easy to get into the kind of a thing in social media or even in like YouTube or whatever, where you're just kind of seeing more of the same thing or hearing from more of the same people. Look, again, I will compare it to the past, which is we did not have diversity of voices before the internet. Like there's no golden age, right? Where, like it is not true that in 1980, everybody was routinely hearing the other side of the argument. And then as of the internet coming along, they're no longer hearing it. Like that's just simply untrue. What was happening in 1980 was the other side of the argument literally was not being represented anywhere, because it was just iced out. So I'll give you my favorite example of this. So my favorite example of this is the great, when people kind of talk about how great the media used to be and how honest everything used to be, they always talk about this guy, Walter Cronkite, right? Who was the anchor of the CBS Nightly News, who was like the voice of authority in America. And they always talk about this like incredible moment that like kind of brought home his ability to kind of shape, the narrative and what Americans believed and kind of get to the right moral position when he turned against a moment that illustrated kind of the greatness of the media at that time, the media model of that time. The other part of that story that doesn't get told is the fact that he switched to be against the Vietnam War in 1968 because he and everybody else like him was pro the Vietnam War before 1968. Right.
Right.
And if you go back and you try to find anywhere in like the narrative, the public narrative of the time, kind of before 1968 and for sure before 1965, because the Vietnam War really started really under Kennedy.
Yeah, 62.
Right. It basically like the counter argument basically didn't exist. Like there were politicians who were anti the war anti the Vietnam War in the Kennedy administration. They did exist. They were on the far right. They were kind of these leftover Republican isolationists from this strain of Republicanism that predated World War II that had been very discredited. And they were completely dismissed.
Paleoconservatives.
Exactly. Like old school, like pre World War II isolationists.
Yeah.
With names that are lost to history, right? Like Taft and these other guys. And so like it just, there was a monoculture. Like there was a monoculture. The monoculture was for the war, as it ramped up, and then the monoculture flipped to become against the war, right? And that had a whole other set of consequences to it. But it's not like there was like a huge raging debate. Like the monoculture went one way, and then the monoculture went the other way. And we could say the same thing about many, many, many other kind of topics over the course of the last 50 or 60 years, because we just lived in this mass media environment. And by the way, it's not even that the people running the mass media had bad intent. It's just if you only have a few voices, and they're kind of integrated together into this kind of system of prestige, right? And they come from this certain social class, they're going to tend to think the same things. They're going to tend to all agree with each other. And if you have like the economics of the way mass media used to work and the technologies that used to have, like broadcast TV, where you had this very high level of centralization, you're just not going to get representation of a broad set of voices. And so again, I would say, like, as bad as echo chambers are on the internet today, and there probably is some that probably is true to some degree. We're all still getting exposed to counter arguments on things with way higher frequency than we used to, like way higher frequency.
Yeah, you can just, it's a choice now, right? You can choose to be on Tumblr or Mastodon and just listen to those same people. You can go to YouTube and just listen to, right-wing voices or whatever. But you have that choice. You can listen to counter arguments, and these are more or less open platforms, even though, a lot of people are now being sort of pushed out of some of these platforms. Like on Twitch, you can't be a right-winger on Twitch. You will get banned, right? That is one of the issues with how much control, I guess, that sites like Twitch have over the conversation, right? It's basically a monopoly, and it's run by just one small group of people, sadly.
Hey, Alex.
Hey, so I know you were an initial investor back in like 2011 with Twitter. So I just wanted to ask, what were the things that drew you to initially invest in Twitter? What do you think the best things about the platform today are? And then what would you like to see like the platform improve on as far as features and user experience?
Yeah, so I mean, look, it was a genius concept, and at least for those of us who saw it early on. Even in the very early form.
No, he's
you're back.
What's that?
Yeah, you're back, Mark. Sorry, you dropped out for 2 seconds.
Yep. Yeah, so I'm just saying, like, I always thought it was a genius idea, and I, give Jack Dorsey and his colleagues at the time, Jason Goldman and the others who worked on it, just a ton of credit. It was like a real breakthrough idea, and and the way the idea presented, the way I thought about it at the time was the way the idea presented was it was actually this sort of idea out of computer science called publish subscribe, right? So there's sort of the idea of a public graph, and the idea that people could publish and then other people could subscribe, and that you could have this sort of one-way follow thing. Right, because the dominant social media kind of mechanism at that time was a two-way thing, and so they had this idea of have a one-way connection, and then
they called it a microblog. It's a smaller version of LiveJournal.
Exactly. Well, and that's the other thing. And then Jack had this thing, and it took me a long time to figure this out because and Ed Williams also had this thing, and where they had this philosophy where they said constraints are good. Like constraints are enabling, and it threw me in the early years when they would talk about that, because I came up in a time of software where it's just like you just like keep adding features. Like constraints are bad. Like you want things, you want software to do more things. And they had this design principle, which was the opposite of the conventional wisdom, that said constraints are good. And specifically constraining the length of the message was a good thing.
Yep, 140.
Yeah, and like in the beginning, and you guys will recall, you guys probably recall, like in the beginning, like this thing was mocked. Like Twitter was ridiculed, right? Like broadly by people who were like, "This is ridiculous." Who cares what your cat had for breakfast? Nothing of any interest can be expressed in 140 characters.
People are called Twitter shitters, right? I mean, that was like a popular Penny Arcade comic where they were making fun of Twitter, and people would use it to just put their brain droppings on the site.
Yeah. So it's just like this whole thing is absurd. It was not taken seriously. I actually remember this moment. I remember actually the first moment when a major kind of political figure took Twitter seriously. It was, at least that I remember, it was Erdogan, who was the president of Turkey, and he was getting, Turkey was getting kind of increasingly kind of authoritarian. And Erdogan came out and he said, I think I forget the exact quote, but something like Twitter is the biggest threat to the Turkish regime. And it was so weird because it's like in America, it's like, who cares? It's what your cat had for breakfast. And in Turkey, it's like the biggest threat to the authoritarian government. It's like
the Arab Spring, right?
Yeah.
It was enabled by Twitter.
Yeah. So the Arab Spring kind of really, that was sort of the moment, right? That was the moment when it went from something that was considered totally trivial to something that was considered, really, really important. Now, of course, in that era, it was viewed as like, oh, political action happening on Twitter is therefore a hugely positive thing. right? Because it's
Yep.
leading, he's leading to, presumably freedom and peace in the Middle East. And so, and then look, the other thing that happened was, Obama got reelected in 2012, and there were these just glowing magazine covers and profiles and stories about how the internet was just incredibly great for democracy because Obama was able to use it for fundraising and get out the vote efforts. And so, it kind of, the narrative, kind of shifted hard in that direction. And then of course the narrative shifted hard in the other direction after the next cycle. But, yeah, so anyway, like, it was just, it was pure genius at the start. I mean, the whole history is obviously very documented of everything that they've been through. I just think there's a lot of genius in the original idea. Like, I think the core foundational idea is still the right idea. I think publish subscribe is a great idea. I think people should be able to publish what they want, within like quite literally like bounds of the law. I think people should be able to subscribe and listen to and interact with the people they want to. I think that, I think that it should be, there's no question. Oh, I'll give you something. Like, I don't think we've seen the first internet president yet, right? Like, Obama, people wanted to say Obama was the first internet president because he used the internet for fundraising, and then people wanted to say Trump was the first internet president because he used Twitter and social media for kind of outbound communications. But I actually don't think we've seen the first internet president yet. I don't think we've seen the first internet native president who basically just does everything online, and they just do everything through social media, right? And they just
Elon could be that person.
Well, he's got this.
Unfortunately, the law says he can't be.
Oh yeah, he can't. Of course, he's not born in the U.S. I forgot.
Issue.
Yep.
But his playbook, to our earlier conversation about honesty in public, his playbook does point the way, right? Like, and so, I think there will be, and I don't know whether it's in 2024 or 2028 or 2032, but one of these cycles, there's going to be somebody who figures this out. And I think it's going to be great because I think it's going to be the most, just like we were saying about, it's going to be the politician who has the most direct relationship with the people that anybody's had in a very long time. It's going to be somebody who's like out there and exposed. It's going to be somebody who's who's in an actual feedback loop, with his supporters, with his voters, and is not being basically not having his message be kind of distilled into these very narrow, kind of top down centralized channels. I think that's coming. I don't know when it comes. I think it's coming. I think it'll be great. I think it'd be great if Twitter were a platform for that.
Before I go to Alex, talking about Twitter. I read an article where Jason talked about you and others, it wasn't just you, looking at potentially buying Twitter during the Obama administration. Not sure if you can comment on that, but my question is more, first, why? And second, how would Twitter look like if you were running the show?
Oh yeah, we didn't try to. We tried. My firm tried over the years different times to invest. They could consider different kind of things over time, but nothing ever came together. We just always assumed it would always be a public company once it went public. We did not. We never envisioned that something would happen like one man deciding to buy it.
But let's say if it did happen, how would you run the show?
I mean, look, I would say Elon's strategy makes a lot of sense to me. So, he's and by the way, like, it's fairly amazing that you've got the guy who's like the #1 power user of the thing who now owns it, right? Like that's, I think that's pretty amazing. So, look, I like what he's doing. Like, I like the idea that it's going to, go back. Twitter used to describe itself. It was not that long ago that Twitter described itself as this free speech wing of the free speech party. That was not that many years ago. And so
2012, right?
Yeah. I like how he's pushing it. And then look, the public graph, this concept of the public graph, the publish subscribe thing, like, it ought to be a giant business. Like, it really ought to be a really big business, because it ought to be the place where businesses are very active. It ought to be the place where people, businesses interact with customers. It's obviously not the only place that happens, but it should be one of the places where that happens. And so, I think the business opportunity is clearly very large. And then look, the more of an open platform it is, I think the bigger the business opportunity. I'll just give you like one. Here's a historical thing, and I don't, Elon can decide what he wants to do on this, but there was a time, like about 10 years ago, there was a time when Twitter actually had an API, right? And meaning that basically you could actually build apps on top of Twitter. Like you could actually like extend Twitter as a developer. They were kind of turning it into an open system.
They closed it.
And then they closed it. Yeah, they shut it down.
You had a lot of good apps, yeah, and it just died.
They killed it, right? And and it goes back to the thing we were talking about before of this kind of oscillation pendulum that goes back and forth between like centralized and decentralized. And so they were starting to open it up and make it more decentralized, and then they decided to kind of shove it back to be totally centralized. Jack has talked publicly about this Blue Sky effort, and he's got other kinds of things that he's working on. to maybe have a, decentralized, kind of thing. There are other people working on new kinds of decentralized, systems like this.
And I think you invested in a platform called DSO as well.
Yeah, and then also, I'll give a shout out. Farcaster would be another one. So, crypto native, publish subscribe model, and inherently open. Where anybody can build there's already Farcaster's, not that large yet, but it's got like a lot of developer activity for the size that it's at, and people can build apps, and there's a lot of creativity happening in that. There's more creativity happening in the Farcaster developer ecosystem than there is in the Twitter developer ecosystem, because of the fact that it is actually open and you can actually extend it. And so, maybe there's something that can be done there. That would be like the code equivalent of free speech. Letting developers create things. And so maybe I'll generalize this out. I would hope in the next 10 or 20 years, I would hope the big internet companies, the big software systems that get built, I would hope that they're more open than they've been.
Before I go to other panelists, what would you say? I've got two questions. What would you say is Achilles' heel for the current strategy by Elon? Is it advertisers, the advertiser revolt, or it could be too little censorship?
I don't know. I wouldn't. I'm glad we're betting behind him. I wouldn't bet against him. He makes. I guess I'll just use his words. I think it was actually in your stream. I think in your space, where he said, the thing about doing controversial things is that if you're doing them on behalf of the people, right, then, you have an inherent level of like moral authority, and then the people who want to stop you are, basically acting against the people. And I think there's a lot to that. Like, I think there's a lot of substance to that, and I think that's what he's doing. So, I think as long as he stays kind of true north on that, I think he'll have any number of challenges, but I think it's going to be hard for him to not be able to deliver.
I'm getting some good questions from the audience. I know panelists have their hands up, but they're just too good of questions. So one of them is, if Elon proves the current model with Twitter, I know we're talking about a lot about Elon and Twitter, but hey, we're using Twitter. If it proves the current model, do you see other social platforms follow suit? That's question number one. And then question number two is Jordan Peterson coming out against anonymous accounts. I think you supported free speech for anon accounts. I could be wrong. I think I was going through your tweets. So would love your take on pseudo anonymity, because that's obviously a sexy thing right now in Web3.
Yeah. So in the first question, I'll just say that every tech CEO I talk to, including the social media ones and also the non-social media ones, like they're all watching this whole thing very closely. And I think they're generally, I would say, rooting for him and hoping that, his different approaches prove out. And then they're all thinking and talking of like, okay, like if he can do these things, maybe I can do these things. And so he's blazing a trail that I think a lot of people are paying attention to. And I certainly think that, as he proves these things out, I think some of his ideas will be picked up by other companies. Look, on anonymity. Yeah. So I think Jordan's great, but I do disagree with him on this. Look, freedom of speech. My understanding of freedom of speech, whether you have the sort of a legal understanding or whether you just have like a moral and ethical understanding, is like it's not limited to people who use their real name, and very specifically, they're like in the American tradition. It's very
the Federalist
much
Papers.
Federalist
right?
Papers.
The Federalist Papers are written anonymously or published anonymously. It's only until later that they started adding their names to the signatories at the bottom.
That's exactly right. And so there's a book I always recommend on this, which is just a fantastic book. It's called Infamous Scribblers, written by this guy, Eric Burns, and he reconstructs what the media environment was actually like in the American colonial period leading up to the American Revolution and after, including the Federalist Papers. And he actually goes through in detail what actually newspapers were like in those days, because newspapers were like a super central thing to the media environment back then. And the newspapers in that whole era, they were filled with people writing in pseudonyms. And in fact, he tells the story in the book that Ben Franklin kind of first became famous and entered politics by being a newspaper publisher. He was trying to sell newspapers and he was trying to argue out all these ideas. And so he actually at one point had 15 different pseudonyms that he would write under, and he would actually set his pseudonyms against each other in these kind of pitched arguments, right?
Oh, that's brilliant.
Right, and so he would have these furious debates, right? And it's actually one guy writing the whole thing, but he's kind of pushing all of these different ideas and then stress testing them, in public by having these kind of debates between his different pseudonyms. And then there were lots of other people writing in his newspaper and other newspapers who would join the debates. And so, like, I mean, quite honestly, it worked for Ben Franklin. Like, I think it should work for us.
Yeah.
And I think anonymous and pseudonymous speech should be on an equal tier with people with real names.
I agree on that one. Now, last question I promise for the other panelists. That's a tough one from the audience, Mark. Do you think there's a chance that Facebook, Instagram, or other social platforms also censored political groups? It's a really tough question. Hope you can answer it.
Yeah, I have a total pass on this one. I'm on the board, so
I thought so. Yeah. I gave it. Look, you can't blame me. I gave it a try, man. It's decentralized. Someone asked that question. It's a decentralized space, so I blame them. Blame decentralization. Alex
I
V,
got questions
to you, man.
first before he
Okay, go ahead, bro.
So I got some questions earlier from Catherine Brodsky. I think you know her. She asks, first question: Clubhouse versus Spaces. How do you think they play together?
Yeah, I'm gonna also pass on that one. It's a situation where we're involved on both sides, and so
Nice.
I am
Okay.
I am an enthusiastic supporter of both companies.
I'm the nice guy. I had that question and I skipped it, Mark. So I'm not that bad.
Yeah. And the second question, I think you probably could answer to this one is, you're playing with the Chat GPT earlier today with all your AI essays. Have you learned anything from it? Like, what's the takeaway from AI generated content?
Yeah, and I should also disclose, this is going to get boring if I keep saying it, but we're a small investor in OpenAI. So we have a little bit of a vested interest here.
Mark,
but
you gotta invest less so we can ask you more questions.
I know.
so we can pick your brain.
On a broader note, like what's your opinion of like AI and its the role that it plays in society?
Yeah, because I heard you speak. I heard you speak to Joe Rogan about Sentinel AI as well. That was a really good discussion for anyone that wants to check it out. But go ahead.
Yeah, so look, this is a huge moment. This is a breakthrough moment, right? And so the way to think about it is like there was, I'll give you a slightly longer explanation on this. So AI is an idea that started around the same time as the creation of the computer. It was actually Alan Turing who kind of first came up with a lot of the core ideas around AI. And this is like in the early 1940s. And then there were, lots of smart people who worked on all these kind of AI ideas and neural networks and so forth, all the way through basically from the 40s, all the way through into basically the early 2010s, and actually had very little to show for it. And so, when I was entering college in '89 in the computer science program at Illinois, there had been a huge AI kind of boom in the '80s that had fizzled out because they couldn't ever quite get the stuff to work right. And so there were actually researchers and scientists who spent their entire careers trying to get AI to work and literally were never able to do it. It basically turns out they were on the right track the whole time. They basically didn't have the right infrastructure. The computers weren't fast enough. They didn't have big enough data sets, and then there was just a lot of work to be done in the algorithms. And then there was this big breakthrough in 2012, which was computers being able to recognize objects and images. And that's what led to sort of all the enthusiasm around things like self-driving cars. And then there was this big breakthrough in computer-generated art, which is only like a year ago now or something, where it started to work really well, right? Exactly. And then natural language processing has been moving. I think the natural language breakthroughs were like 2 or 3 years ago, where it started to get really good in both directions. Like if you use like speech synthesis, if there's like apps on the iPhone that'll like read documents to you, like the voices got much better, like all at once. And so like that stuff's getting really good. Natural language recognition, like it's like Google Assistant's probably the best at that right now, I think. Where if you talk to it, like it's incredibly good. Or YouTube, you see this with YouTube automated closed captioning.
I use
like
Descript.
Yeah, and then we have this company Descript that is doing this for production, and like this stuff has gotten really good. Like we're at the point where computers are basically as good as people are at recognizing human speech, and almost certainly better at this point.
Yeah, it's 99% accuracy for all the stuff.
Yeah, so it's a huge advance. Like it's a huge advance, and so GPT-2 and GPT-3 were big advances. Chat GPT is what they call GPT 3.5, which is an intermediate release. They have GPT-4 in the wings, which I think is going to be a significant advance. Even again here pretty quick. And then now they have the chatbot interface. And it's just look, it's amazing what the thing can do. In a lot of ways, probably the most surprising thing to me using it is that it's even better at writing fiction than it is at nonfiction. And so if you ask it to write a screenplay or a stage play or a song or rap lyrics or a sonnet, or a limerick, like it's just incredibly good.
Ask it to write Shakespearean stuff, and it will literally put out Shakespearean sonnets. It's insane how good it is.
But Mark, doesn't that scare you at all? Because you've been a lot more optimistic when you had a fireside chat with Peter, and he was a bit more. Him and Elon are a bit more critical. Is there any fear that AI could eventually replicate itself, and we could embed conscious into it somehow?
Yeah, no. So I don't think so. I don't think that's how this stuff works. So let me say that. Let me say the following, which is like I do think that these algorithms are going to pass what's known as the Turing test.
Yeah.
I think they're quite close now, and so I think that GPT at some point here is going to pass the Turing test pretty definitively. Where if you define the Turing test basically as the simplified version of the Turing test, basically is you're chatting with something that might be a person or might be a machine, and you can't tell the difference. When you have a conversation, at the end of it, you take a guess as to whether it's a person or a machine, and you're like wrong half the time.
It's already there in video games, right? Like
Yeah,
like in what is it? Like these turn-based strategy games or real-time strategy games, like the stuff that Blizzard makes. It can be extremely hard to tell that you're playing against an AI because it's insanely smart. It's learning from actual players and how they plot out their moves, their strategies, their build orders, and all that stuff. So sometimes players will be going up against these really hard AI, and they won't even realize it's a player, right? I mean, sorry, won't even realize it's an AI.
Yeah, but yes, exactly. But having said that, I think the Turing test is malformed. I've never really thought the Turing test is the right test to apply. And the reason is because human beings are too easy to fool, right?
Yeah, right.
Like we're not that smart, and then like we're relatively easy to trick, right? And there are cons and scams and all kinds of things where people get tricked every day, right? So like I don't think that's a fit. Like that, just because you can trick a human does not mean you've achieved sentience or consciousness, in my view. The tip off on this, on how far we are, is the following. And this is why when I talked to Rogan, I was talking about this case that happened where there was this guy who left Google and said that they had a chat bot that had become sentient. And one of his claims was, he said, I know it's sentient because when I asked it if it wanted to die, it said no, right? And it expressed the fact that it was like afraid to die. It didn't want me to turn it off. And it's like, that's exactly what a living thing would do. And by the way, you can do that. GPT will do that. You can engage in a conversation. You can ask it these questions. You have to they have some guardrails on it, but if you get past the guardrails, you can kind of engage in this conversation, and it will assure you that it's sentient, and it will assure you that it doesn't want to die. You can, however, also have it explain to you how it's not sentient and it's not conscious, and it doesn't care whether you turn it off.
Yeah, ask him about its creators, and it will give you a pretty canned answer.
Yeah, and so it basically it doesn't have an opinion. Like it doesn't know one way or the other if it's conscious. It doesn't have it has no intrinsic motivation. It has no sense of its own self. The Descartes, I think, therefore I am. Like it has no sense of that. And the reason it has no sense of that is like that's not how it's designed, right? What it's designed to do is a very specific thing. It's designed to basically study the sum total of all human written information, process it, and then basically play it back to us. And it plays it back to us in these really elegant, creative ways. But it's math, right? It's a math engine. Like it's doing linear algebra, like at its core. And math does not just suddenly come alive. Like that's not how things work. And so this idea that it all of a sudden kind of becomes conscious just as a process of like organic bottom-up development, like I just don't see it. And I think the bar on either thinking that will happen or thinking that we even know how to do that, I think is much higher than people think.
It's like science fiction at that point, right?
Alex,
so I actually have two questions regarding AI. I don't want to jump off on that and then get back on it. So sorry for the wait, Alex. My first question is, given the recent developments in AI in terms of like Chat GPT and Midjourney, and there are ramifications of creators, right? Especially for those who refuse to use these tools to, in their own creations. So, and there's been this push, especially on a lot of these closed platforms, where they're banning people from using, from submitting AI generated art and things like that. What are your predictions for creators in the future with the advent of all these tools? And it's getting to a point where, something like Midjourney, you can't tell if a person actually drew it or if like a computer came up with it based on a prompt. So what are your predictions for creators in the future for this?
Yeah, so the big question on this kind of thing that I think people generally orient around is when the computer gets really good at doing something like creating art, generating art, is that sort of displacing work that would have been done by human artists on the one hand, right? Or is that giving human artists superpowers where they can now generate much more and maybe better art than they could in the past?
Yeah.
right? And so the way technology plays out over time, there's sort of there's this thing that people talk about called the lump of labor fallacy, which is kind of this idea that if computers do the work, then we don't need people anymore. It's the same concern that was brought up about the automated spinning loom in textiles. It's the same concern that was brought up with the steam engine. It's the same concern that was brought up with mechanical plows in the field, in agriculture. It's the same concern that was brought up with the computer when it first came out.
Yeah, replace calculators, and those replace people doing manual arithmetic. Yeah.
Actually, it's a good, So a great example here is the word computer originally did not refer to a machine; it referred to a person.
Right.
Right. And so if you go back in time, if you go back before the invention of the computer in like 1920s, 1930s, what computer actually meant was it meant like 100 people sitting at rows of desks doing math by hand.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And literally it was a profession. And like insurance companies to calculate like actuarial tables, they actually would employ these people who were human computers doing math by hand. And then those jobs went away because the computer does that better. But what happens on the other side is the computer became a superpower for people to be able to use to do many other kinds of things, and in particular, more valuable and higher impact kinds of things. And so
Elon,
I think
Elon's
here, by the way, Mark, just letting you know as well.
Sure.
Hey, guys.
Yeah. Good.
Hey.
Hey, Elon.
How's it going?
It's going good overall. How are you guys doing?
Fantastic.
Good.
Great to have
Talking
you.
about,
Amazing.
talking about AI and whether we should be scared or not. Mark is pretty optimistic about it.
Well, I think we should be. I think a mixture of positive and negative sentiment, I think, is probably wise. Like, we should be concerned about AI going wrong, but also it will. I mean, it's going to be amazing and scary, obviously. So some of it is perhaps inevitable. So you may as well, if something is inevitable, might as well focus on the positive side.
We discussed as well earlier, we were having a chat about your tweets and your transparency. Like I asked Mark, is Elon just strategic with his tweets? And then Mark answered pretty openly, like, look, man, anything Elon tweets reflects our discussions 100%. So like we're seeing what you're doing on Twitter as an experiment. Everyone's looking at it as an experiment. How's it going so far? Are you enjoying the response?
Yeah, I think overall it's good. There's it's going to be it's a roller coaster, so there's going to be some ups and downs. As long as the long-term trend is up, it's going to be good. And I think Twitter is trending in a positive direction. Like, we're seeing a lot more engagement. And anecdotally, and also in the sort of user average minutes. Like,
I'll ask my question, then we go to Ian and Alex. Elon, my question is about spaces. Where do you see spaces in the next, let's say, 6 to 12 months?
well, Spaces works better than I anticipated, because I was like, is this thing actually worth it or not?
Can I say? Can I say do I have the right to say you're welcome, or no? Too early.
Sure. Clearly way better than I thought, and I like the fact that sort of you're on Twitter, and then it shows that Spaces is active with people that you follow and stuff, and then you can just hop in and talk, just off the cuff. It's pretty cool. I think we need to be better about saving interesting spaces and making them easy to find. So
there's no way to search.
Yeah, exactly. It should be on search. So you know, it's like if you say like the top 1% of Spaces conversations of the year is probably epic, you know.
Yeah.
So, and I
We
think there
were
should
we were
be like
thinking.
Spaces internationally and have like you know, Spaces internationally and get that translated. That would be like a future cool thing.
There should
Yeah, the
probably be a
way
way to save, I mean, sorry, to like save conversations and a way to even search those, right? Because right now the only way to do that is to, you know, like Kim.com had a bunch of really great spaces, but
We need to make them easy to find. In general, search
now
on
what's
Twitter is terrible, and we need to make it much better.
what's working well, Elon, not sure if you saw that earlier, like we've done a lot of spaces, we're testing different things. What's working really well is breaking news. So whenever something happens, I've got my team
Yeah.
watching everything 24/7. They wake me up. That seems to be working best, you know, because it's so different to podcasts and YouTube streams. So breaking news, and we were thinking about trying to cover the World Cup as well. We didn't do it eventually, but that was one of the things we were looking at doing. Ian, do you have
Yeah.
any other questions before we go to the panel?
yes. So, you know, you were at the Dave Chappelle thing a couple of days ago, and there was this, you know, this narrative is that you've been booed by everyone. And when I say everyone, I'm putting that in quotes. And it's like it should be obvious to everybody that wasn't everyone. What kind of reception did you actually receive?
Yeah, I mean, okay. I mean, this could be obviously this is just my perception standing on the stage, and like you know, I'm friends with Chappelle and with Chris, and I've known them for a long time, especially Dave, and you know, I've always loved his work. So you know, we were just like hanging out beforehand, and it's like, well, you know, it would be like totally bizarre if like I came on stage, and they're like, yeah, that's cool, let's do it, and so that was. We only decided to go to the show, or even knew about the show, like a few hours beforehand. So then it was just like standing there ad hoc, and you know, it was just it's like an interesting situation. Obviously, I made some controversial decisions, especially as viewed by those who live in San Francisco, and so I wouldn't expect my fan club to be 100%, even at a Chappelle show. So. You know, so then I think there's an interesting sort of group dynamic thing that happens where if like one person starts booing, it sort of encourages others to boo, and you know, and then you get sort of like this weird group dynamic happening. The same thing happens on Twitter, just with text. But I, you know, I think in retrospect I should have encouraged the booing and said like. Like, come on, guys! You call that a boo? Please, try harder. Boo! Give me it's all together now. Boo! Come on, you can do it. You can do it. That's a feeble boo. Come on, give us a good belly boo. You know, from the bellow a boo.
Yeah.
I think everyone's cheering that S is in jail right now, though.
Like, boo, 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 boo,
I wanted
boo,
to ask
boo,
you
boo.
more about that.
Anyway, yeah, SBF definitely needs an adult timeout in the big house, as I said. You know, it's like, come on, man. It's like there are people in prison for like stealing a car for like a $5,000 car, and they're in prison. That's if someone's like runs off with like billions of dollars, there's like they should do some time. It's not right that others who steal smaller things should be in prison and they're not. You know, I don't think we need to like, you know, have the guy in prison for life, but he should, you know.
He probably will be.
Yeah, I doubt it.
Yeah, maybe not. I don't know.
I doubt it. I mean, but you know, but it should obviously it would be an outrage if there was no punishment. And so like some number of years of you know, in being stuck in a you know all expenses paid federal vacation. And look on the bright side. And then it's whatever, pay penalties to society. Actually, you know, genuinely be sorry, and then you know, then he can rejoin society.
I think he's going to he's going to feel pretty bad because he won't be able to play any League of Legends while in prison. And that seems to be his number one
He
hobby.
sucks at it anyway.
He does suck at it. Yeah.
Did you see Elon? Did you see the narrative on TV by a few high-profile individuals that were, you know, supportive of Sam in some ways? Is Sam just a really good manipulator with his interviews? Do you think there's some truth? Not sure if you've heard his recent interviews. Could it be a mistake, or is just it's his bullshit meter went off again?
Listen, I don't know. No matter how you cut it, the dude has not been honest with people's money and sold them a bunch of money. Like, there's just no other way to interpret that. Like, obviously, so there's got to be some appropriate punishment here. That is, I actually don't think it should be like life in prison or whatever, but it shouldn't be nothing. I'm not the judge, but like 5 years to 10 years, something.
Maybe. Might be too little compared to Bernie Madoff, right? He got 150 years.
Yeah, I think Bernie Madoff, they're basically saying, like, this guy's, unless he is Methuselah, he's not going to, the actual number of years doesn't matter that much because he's pretty old. So SBF's not that old, so he could actually spend 50 years in prison.
Yeah,
but should he spend 50 years in prison? Probably that's too much. I'm not the I'm not.
It
the
seems
judge
mean.
here,
He's very young, right? I mean, he should have a chance to make mistakes, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm the judge, I would say like 5 years with good behavior. I'm not the who am I? I'm not the judge. 10 years if you're not. 10 years with bad behavior. Like 5 years if you do your best to actually get the money back, and aren't a phony asshole about it, and then 10 years if you hide the money, or longer if you actually hide the money.
Doesn't that feel too lenient, Elon? Like, if it was only 5 years, I would go attempt it. Like, not actually, but like, you know what I'm saying.
Well, like I said, I'm not the judge here. I'm like, what I know. It's a best case. It shouldn't be less than that. But probably not life either. Like, it's like serious punishment, but give the guy some chance of repentance and a comeback.
So I have a question, and this one's from Kristen Ruby. I think you tweeted at her the other day when she was getting some inside leaks from some engineer at Twitter. She's asking, and I'm asking this too, has the AI been retrained? Because right now, I mean, based on the leaks, we have all this information that was basically automatically censoring people through the algorithm. And since you've taken over, have you guys like retrained it so it's not so censorious?
We have made some changes to the algorithm, but not. I mean, they're relatively subtle. I think my instructions to the team is like just show people interesting stuff, and that the right metric I think to focus on is maximize the number of unregretted user minutes. So, and like if you're going to focus on any metric, I think that's the right one. Because so like a frequent criticism I hear of TikTok is that I spent like 2 hours on TikTok, but I regret it, and so we don't want that, So if you have unregretted user minutes, that's it can be a little nebulous to figure that out, but that's I think the right thing to aspire to. And unregretted user minutes are where you learned things, you were entertained, it was funny. You're not going to regret those minutes,
Yeah, absolutely.
I see your hand up, Eric. Eric, you got to unmute, otherwise we'll go to Brian. Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, hey Elon. I was just wondering, is there a possibility that in the future you could decentralize the database of Twitter, or at least open it up so others could build upon it? Like, I feel that it could maybe be a solution to the whole censorship debate. If like Twitter was you ban or block somebody on their front end, another front end like brianstwitter.com could then tie into the database and bring that content up at my own risk.
Maybe. I don't know. There are various like other ways to view Twitter besides the Twitter client. But I'm like open to a lot of different ideas to evolve Twitter over time. The short-term actions have obviously been just like let's just get the company to a financially healthy position, especially given that like we're headed into a recession and advertising will be disproportionately affected, especially advertising where you can't make a clear ROI argument. And like weirdly, this is gonna blow your mind. Twitter for the longest time was really had the advertising engine was maximizing irrelevance. that will actually resonate with you if you have noticed that for most longtime Twitter users have never bought a product ever on Twitter. And you have to say, like, well, doesn't that seem a little strange? Because why wouldn't you have accidentally bought a product on Twitter? It's because the advertising has been maximizing your relevance. So why would it maximize relevance? Because a lot of the ads traditionally at Twitter were sold on a cost per impression basis, and if you do that, you actually don't want people to dwell on or click into an ad because it will reduce the total number of impressions. So you actually want the ads to be as irrelevant as possible, so that you get the most number of, in quotes, impressions. And roughly 25% of Twitter's entire compute budget is spent on maximizing irrelevance, or at least it was until a few weeks ago, where we started to turn the ship in that regard significantly. So you might actually in the last week or two possibly have bought or even thought about buying a product from an ad that you saw on Twitter. So it took me a while to actually even understand this, and because there was like head exploding emoji, you know. I cannot friggin' believe that we would spend 25% of the compute budget on, it's like roughly 130,000 servers, maximizing irrelevance. But it makes total sense if you think about your Twitter usage, because I bet most people here on this call have never bought anything on Twitter, or if they did, it was only in recent weeks. And that's why, because it was actually very good at making sure that the ad was not relevant.
Wow.
The sheer amount of Mike Judge comedy material that we have is insane. In fact, so Mike Judge is a friend of mine, and he lives just outside Austin.
I love his films.
Yeah, he is awesome. So I like texted Mike and said, "Hey, Mike, we got some epic material for some new show if you want to do it." And so hopefully Mike Judge comes by Twitter. He said he might come by like next month or something. So that'd be cool.
Make a series out of it.
Yeah, like honestly, we've got enough material for like many seasons here.
Running a social media company from the ground up, from the Jack days.
Yeah, I just love that the media has to come here just to get their talking points. It's amazing. And that you keep coming to spaces, so they have to come here rather than you going to the media. It's perfect.
Our spaces. I love it. Thanks, Elon. You're the best.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's quite entertaining. Arguably the worst thing you can make is to be boring. That's
you do a good job at not being boring.
Yeah,
I will ask you.
Problematic nowadays.
I'm really knocking it out of the park at not being boring.
I've got a tough question for you. What would you say is your biggest concern, if there is one, on your current strategy with Twitter, on the free speech strategy? Is it? My guess will be advertisers.
Yeah, we did have some advertisers pause because they're like, a lot of them are kind of conservative, and they're like worried about because for a lot of advertisers, they're like basing their decisions off what they read in the press as opposed to what is the platform actually doing,
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I was like, okay. So I've had a lot of calls with the big advertisers and said, like, look, you should just base your opinion on Twitter of what you see on Twitter, not what you read in the newspaper. And in some ways, Twitter and the newspapers are competing, because the newspapers competing, or on the mainstream media is competing for your attention. Twitter's competing for your attention. So there's an attention competition here. So you got to be like, when you're reading in the media, other media, you're actually reading. Think about it like a competitor's opinion of Twitter, and then you're like, oh, okay, maybe that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I said they should judge it by their actual experience on Twitter. And I think actual experience on Twitter is that things have improved dramatically. That's my observation. And even in the last
positive. It's so much more positive nowadays. Like people are actually having fun. They're joining spaces. I've seen so many spaces prop up, and it's just people having chats about nothing, and it's fine, right? Like they love having chats. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Some people would take themselves too seriously. They get knickers in a knot type of thing. And it's like, But and then they do that on Twitter, and they like go on a tirade and whatever, which is fine. Do it on Twitter. That's cool.
Increases user
I
engagement.
love it when people complain about Twitter on Twitter.
Yeah, they're not doing it on Mastodon or whatever site they're going to. It's on Twitter.
Because it's too boring because no one's listening.
Yeah, they're screaming into the void.
Yeah, it's screaming into the void. Like, just go into an empty room and complain. The complainers have to have somebody. They have to complain to someone.
Yeah,
there's irony in them tweeting about leaving Twitter. Like, do they not see the irony?
No,
yeah, apparently not.
They don't. So I actually have I have a super good question from Kristen. It's a follow-up to the last one. She asked regarding the data she's reviewing, that was leaked by a former person at Twitter. I don't think they work there anymore. It shows, it showed clear bias in the AI towards conservatives. How can you ensure that the AI won't be used in this way moving forward, like for political, for censoring political speech? And based on the data that was leaked, do you believe that political bias existed regarding how Twitter was monitored, how it monitored political misinformation? So it's like two questions, I guess.
Well, first of all, Twitter's AI is extremely primitive, so I wouldn't read too much into it.
Okay.
I think we will improve AI. Oh my God, this is not really a word we should be using for the Twitter algorithm. Okay, that's not the case. It's really a very, very simple ML that Twitter is using. If I compare it to, say, like Tesla Autopilot, oh my God, it's like orders of magnitude simpler. So we will improve that a lot over time. And like I said, our goal is going to be maximize undergraded user minutes. So you're like maximally informed and entertained. And it'll be good to expose people to different points of view, so you don't just, hopefully people are, open to that or become more open to that over time. It's like, at least listen to the arguments from the other side and don't just demonize them and assume that everything they say is just evil. I think people should be open to having their mind changed once in a while, or at least understanding those they oppose better. What's the harm in that? At least understanding those with different viewpoints. That seems like a good thing. And you can still disagree with them afterwards, but at least you know where they're coming from. But obviously, historically, I'm just stating, anyone who was a casual observer of Twitter, that Twitter was extremely heavily biased towards the left. The Twitter wasn't just drinking the Kool-Aid; it was swimming in the Kool-Aid.
It was pumping out the water.
It was like it's like asking the fish, like, hey, do you see water? Like, what water? Like, you're in it, man. it's all water.
In a similar vein, Sebastian Gorka here, Mr. Musk. It's been reported that you want to turn Twitter into like a super app like WeChat. Would you address concerns of those who say that's very exciting, but to prevent that abuse in a similar vein we've seen in China, especially if you're not running Twitter, what do you say to those who worry that could be abused?
Well, that's like honestly a high-class problem because we've got a long way to go before we're at anywhere like that. But I do think the succession problems are a real issue because it matters who's running the place, But I can say, like, okay, like the things I can only do the things that are within my control. I'm trying to say, like, what set of actions can I do that are maximally useful, and that will be to make Twitter more and more useful, more and more entertaining. Doing the dead nuts obvious stuff like adding long form video, monetization for creators.
Yes, please.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer. The stuff's like no-brainer moves,
Are you working with anyone on this? Like any big YouTubers are contributing? I'm sure they have a lot of ideas.
The key is I've just got to get the engine of engineering at Twitter working. So because you can have a million good ideas, but if you can't implement them from a software standpoint, it doesn't matter.
Right.
So it's like I said, most of the stuff that needs to be done is extremely obvious, and I think, like, frankly, like like a 12-year-old could tell you what needs to happen. It's not like you don't need Einstein here.
No.
but we need to actually have be able to evolve the software rapidly so that good ideas can actually be implemented. And the software stack at Twitter is a Django pile of insanity. If anyone has actually been exposed to it, it's like, holy smokes. This is not an easy thing to evolve. That's why simple features take a long time.
Is this something that you would consider, crowdsourcing by opening up the API?
No, it's not about opening. We've got to fix the fundamental core stack.
Oh, okay. The basic stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, like there's a. I won't bore everyone. In fact,
Go ahead.
I've got a sorry, Tesla. Speaking of Tesla, I have a Tesla meeting that I'm late for. I have to step off.
Oh boy.
I'll ask you before you start, Elon, I have one last question. Actually, two quick questions. First, about your White Rabbit tweet. A lot of people are DMing me about this. I haven't seen it, so I'm not sure what it's about. And then the second one, which I always so that's the first one, and then the second one should be a very easy one. We're doing a COVID
Elon,
space, getting a lot of.
Get a question in about Tesla because I'm very concerned as an investor.
Guys, he's got to go.
We gotta go. Eric, Elon jumps in all the time. Eric, I promise you I'll invite you next time he's in. Elon, if I bring Fauci to the space, we're talking to his team. We're getting a whole bunch of doctors. If I do, shit, he dropped out. Fuck. I wanted to ask him. Yeah, I wanted to ask him if he'll.
He already left at that point. Yeah.
I wanted to ask him about if we bring in Fauci, if we can get him to come on. I'll DM him about
I'm sure
this.
He'll say yes.
For anyone listening, just quickly, Ian, quick. Ian, 2 seconds, Ian. For anyone listening, hold on, guys, 2 seconds. Ian, for everyone listening, pinned tweet on my profile is if you want to join the COVID space. I'll try to get Elon in as well. We're going to try to get Fauci, not in that one, but in a future one. But if you go to pinned tweet on my profile, I'll pin it above as well. You could get notified for that space. Should be a slippery slope, really, really tough one. Well, it's fucking cool getting Mark and Elon in the same space. Yeah. What's your takeaway? You've been on almost every space. You've been on the last space with me and Elon. What's your take on this one, Ian?
Fantastic. I mean, he was very grounded, very based, just answering questions. I mean, it's chill, right? It's chill. That's what these spaces are for. It's not like, like a lot of people are like terrified, like, oh my God, you only get to speak to him once. No, I mean, it is very clear that he intends to use these spaces quite often. This is not the only space he's ever joined. And it's good to, to have someone who cares so much about his platform that he is, like dedicating time to speak to people about the issues that affect this platform, right? I mean, with Jack, no one could get a response out of Jack at any point in time, right? It's only now that even Jack is like responding to people, which is cool. Like, good for Jack. I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing his next projects, and I hope that he follows in Elon's footsteps and like encourages the community to join in and have these conversations. If anything, every like Mark said, right? Every tech CEO is looking at Elon right now and they're seeing, is this strategy working? And I think so. Yeah, it is working.
And I love Mark's discussion as well and his support of Elon's strategy and how he said other social platforms. I don't know if he said that word, but other executives and other players, big players in the space, other executives are watching this. I'm going to call it experiment by Elon, the free speech experiment.
And as I pointed out, Mark Zuckerberg said at the New York Times book event thing that he was watching it. He's watching Elon closely. So they're quite open about it.
He said that. Yeah. He said that openly, Mark.
He said that openly,
Mark, I see Mark as a complete opposite, and he gets a lot. Like I don't. Obviously, I'm indifferent about everyone, but Mark gets a lot of hate for various reasons. But it gets a lot of hate. I think one of the reasons is he's very secretive, very private, and not as relatable. Yeah, Elon is on the completely opposite spectrum, and it's just such an interesting dichotomy. And we're seeing that Elon's strategy of being very approachable, jumping to a space, speaking his mind, could backfire at times, but the pros significantly outweigh the cons, and he's kind of practicing what he preaches through free speech.
Elon. Right, don't bet against Elon, right? I mean, he has a plan. I mean, I know it sounds kind of silly, like a bit fanboyish thing. He has a plan, but I mean, look at his track record, right? PayPal, and then Tesla, and then SpaceX.
I was even without the track record, I was critical of Elon's acquisition. I'm like, I wasn't optimistic. I was not even indifferent. I was more, I'm like, it could be troublesome. And then when I saw his aggressive move to free speech, I'm like, ideologically, I support it, but strategically, it just looks scary, and I don't
In
know
the
how he
short
gets
term,
the
it looks scary. I
balls to
think in
do
the
it.
short, oh yeah, it takes tremendous balls to do it. I mean, in the
It's
short term, yeah, it looks
insane.
scary, but in the long term, it does make a lot of sense. I mean, his goal, and this is my opinion, right? But he has stated this quite openly. Like his goal for his vision for like humanity and the future that it offers requires a free speech platform. And the way that Twitter was going, the way it was controlling speech, and let's be honest here. I mean, Twitter may not be the largest platform, but it is the most influential platform. This is where all the journalists are. This is where all the politicians are. Things happen on Twitter before their news.
Ian, we had, just to give you two examples. First, we just had Mark Andreessen Horowitz, and Elon just come on and just chat to us in a space live.
This
And Elon
would be
just
a news story, right? So really multiple news stories. Yeah.
Man, like, where else can you find this? That's the beauty about spaces.
Nowhere.
And then the way we break news. You remember when we did the FTX? I think you said you were in some of these spaces.
Yep.
The journalists were in our space, and then we see the reports come out by Bloomberg. We've got so many examples. After we break them in the space, like the block story, how FTX funded the block. Sam Alameda gave money to the CEO of the block. That news broke 4 days ago. If people were in our space and they connected with one of the whistleblowers, they knew about this months ago, and it was in the data room. We were talking about this yesterday, I think. So the I know Elon called it. I think it was Elon or someone called it citizen journalism. It
was Elon. Yeah, called it that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when he first jumped into the space. It's actually like, I thought it was a cool term, but I'm like, I don't know how true that is. But it is,
though. But it is a term. Yeah, it's a good term.
Yeah, it is.
He's
He's
100% popularizing it.
And it's working. Like, not only is it a cool, sexy term, it's genuinely working. And more, I go through the audience all the times.
Yep.
Every single outlet, I've seen it in the audience at least once. And the top outlets from BBC to Reuters, they talk to us all the time. Yesterday, Washington Post, New York Times all the time, Fox are here all the time. They're always here, and I see the reports going out right after we talk about it, and they obviously DM us, and they wait for the recording to come out. So every time, and I kind of piss them off because they're like waiting for the recording, and they're like, guys, I'm not going to end it for you guys, and it goes on for another 10 hours, and they're waiting because they need to verify.
Right? Because they're very entitled. I mean, they have this 9 to 5.
No, but they need to verify as well. I'll give them credit. So what we do now is like we record it separately. We record it separately and send it out to them. But like the experiment of Twitter Spaces, even Elon said, like he's surprised by how it's going. The experiment is working. It could become a highlight of Twitter, and that's why I'm investing so much time and effort, and we have a whole team doing it.
And this is just
it seems to be going well.
Start, right? I mean, like as he said, he has to work the core functionality of Twitter, and that's what they're working on right now. That's the reason why we haven't seen too many new features yet, and that's all coming to Twitter Blue first, obviously. But we're going to see a lot of this, moving forward. Like 6 months from now, Twitter could look like a completely different place. It could have videos on it. It could have playlists, stuff that creators are just going to flock to because that's where their audience is anyway. Like, most people are not on YouTube 24/7. Maybe some people are, but most people are not, right? And imagine having direct, coordination with your creators. You're telling them, "Hey, go make this," and they go and create something. Say they're musicians, for instance, they will do that, and doing it live on a space. I mean, that's the future, for creation.
Yeah,
and imagine that. Go ahead, Steve.
Ian, don't you guys remember? This is hardly the first time that critics of Elon have claimed doom and gloom over his business style and business practices.
And right. You got no experience building a spacecraft. What are you doing? It's like, well, the foundation's already there. It's just a matter of commercializing it. And sure enough, he's the number one right now.
And Ian, I'm sure you remember when Elon first went on Joe Rogan and smoked a doobie on there. Tesla stock did go down for a couple days temporarily, and then we had all the business journals come out and say Tesla's done. We need new leadership. This guy's out of control. This isn't professional, et cetera, et cetera. Well, look, and Tesla went on to ascend to all-time highs, repeatedly since then. So,
Look what happened to Apple when they kicked out Steve Jobs. That is not a good idea. If they kick out Elon Musk, it's game over.
Pretty much.
But if this experiment by Elon works, I'd be fascinated to see if other social platforms follow suit, because then they'd be under pressure. If the experiment ends up being a success.
And it's a good thing, right? Because he is showing that this experiment in free speech is going to work. And it's already working, despite the negative press, despite all that. Where are they complaining about it? They're complaining about it on Twitter, right? Of all places. They're not complaining about it on Mastodon or anywhere else. They're complaining about it on here because, as he said, shouting to the void, it's just hilarious. Nobody wants to do that. It's an empty room. It's pathetic. Think about it. Just a guy shouting into an empty space. That nobody wants that. They need an audience, and they're narcissists. Sorry for you guys in the audience who are narcissists. But yeah.
Grant, I think I see you jump in.
Yeah. Hey, great room, guys. Great job on what you guys are doing here. So,
thank you.
It's curious to me. Every time anybody asks an engineering question to him, he almost chuckled more tonight than he did 3 or 4 nights ago, and to where it's laughable. And I just wonder what that says about Jack.
It says that he wasn't running a tight ship, if anything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds to me like there's nothing here. There's nothing there.
It's very
basic. Platform has to be rebuilt.
Yeah, like I asked him about APIs, right? And he's like, he just laughed at that joke, and it's like, okay,
yeah, exactly.
It's clearly not ready for any of that, not yet. Yeah.
So we're moving a bunch of our ad dollars after I heard him on his plane. I don't know, I guess a week ago now.
Yep.
We started moving ad dollars off of Google and Facebook onto Twitter to support him and content. But it's almost like, are they even ready for content providers to bang away here?
Right.
And that's what I was hoping to ask you.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, like, I advertise on Twitter, and it's like, it's kind of not worth it. It's better to do it on TikTok because it actually gives me options of who I want to target, what their demographics are. Twitter doesn't offer any of that. It's not very good. It's very random, right? So give it a few months, I would say. That's probably what they're building right now. I mean, it is what they're building right now. That's what you said. So, yeah.
But spaces are free, and I will tell you, they are the best advertising, I mean, of any platform. I would say this is where it's at. I mean, there's really better. And then to have a chance of Elon Musk showing up into your space, which he's been in a few of Mario's now. He's come to one of my spaces. I mean, it's just going to keep going. And like Ian said, he's going to continue to use this platform to grow this platform. And it makes sense. Why go do interviews with the media who is just constantly bashing you? Why go give them views and clicks when you can just come here to the people who support you? And
it's the perfect middle finger. I love it. Yeah, it's the perfect middle finger to the media.
Mario, did anybody notice that he zipped up his pants? Did y'all?
No.
He was getting dressed at the beginning. He was. He was getting dressed. You could hear his zipper pull up. Anybody?
Yeah.
I know that point.
But that's the thing. Like Grant, when I did the space for just for everyone listening, if I did the space for 15 hours hosting it,
$100 billion zipper, man.
But that's the thing. Like when you do those spaces, no one has any idea what you're doing in the background. Like some cases, you don't want to know what I'm doing in the background when I'm hosting some of these spaces.
I'm eating a snack. I'm eating a snack.
You're innocent, bro. No. Hey, Alex?
Yeah, I was gonna say, as one of like the main people that are hosting these, for a suggestion to Elon.
Oh, you dropped out.
Yo, can you hear me?
Go ahead. Sorry, Alex.
Yeah, say it again. I was gonna say, how would you feel